In today's video, we're going to talk about how to create an agent node in Jenkins. Are you new here? If you are, welcome. And if you are new here, you don't know who I am. My name is Darren Pope, and I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees. You may have watched a previous video where I was talking about what is a Jenkins agent. And in that video, I gave you a couple of examples of what agents are and how they can be used. As we get into today's video, we're actually going to set up an agent and connect it to our controller. Where we're starting today is that we have a Jenkins LTS controller version 2.289.1. When it was installed, we used install suggested plugins. And I also have an agent, but it's not connected just yet. That's why we're doing this video today. So my controller is running on a CentOS 7.9 machine. Also, my agent is a CentOS 7.9. So let's go through and see how this is going to work. I'm going to go ahead and log into my controller. And what we're going to do is when you go to connect an agent, you can get there in one of two different ways. I'm going to show you both ways. The first way is to go to Manage Jenkins, go to Manage Nodes and Clouds, and then you can click on New Node. But let me show you a faster way to do that. I'm going to go back to the dashboard, and instead of following Manage Jenkins, all you have to do is click on Build Executor Status. And that takes you right back to the same page. So let's go ahead and get started creating our agent. I'm going to click on New Node. For the node name, I'm going to name it Agent 1. Now this is up to you. You can give it a name that matches your host name. I see that a lot. Or maybe you just give it some other random name. It doesn't matter. This is up to you. It's just a name. In my case, I'm naming it the same as the host name of my machine. I'm going to go ahead and click on Permanent Agent because this is going to be connected permanently to my controller. Once I click on OK, we get to the agent detail screen. I've got Agent 1, that's what I just entered in on the previous screen. The description, I'm going to give it a description of this is my great agent. Okay. Number of executors. By default, this is 1. Here's the rule of thumb. Typically, you only have one single executor assigned to an agent. In my case, my agent instance has one CPU in it. So it sort of makes sense to have a single executor mapped to a single CPU. But let's say for a moment that you have real bare metal hardware and you have 40 CPUs available on that machine. Or maybe you have a virtualized machine that has 4 CPUs available to it, or 4 vCPUs. What should this setting be now? Well, in the bare metal example where I have 40 real CPUs, would I set my number of executors to 40? Maybe. Would I set it to 1,000? No way. So here's the rough rule of thumb. Never have the number of executors exceed the number of CPUs or vCPUs available to you on the agent. So in my case of 40, the maximum I would ever put in the number of executors is also 40. In the example of a VM where I had 4 CPUs, it's going to depend because maybe in reality the type of workload that I'm going to be putting on that agent is going to be multi-threaded C++, and my build tools will actually use those, and I don't necessarily want more workload to be added to that agent. So, rule of thumb, keep it 1. If you have extra capacity, then don't exceed the number of CPUs or vCPUs available to you on that agent. And let that be a starting point. If you see that, okay, even though I have 4 vCPUs and I've set it to 4 executors, I am maxed out at 100% all the time, then I might want to back that down from 4 to maybe 2 and see how it works. Or maybe it's, boy, I've got 4 vCPUs and running all the time, I've got jobs queuing up, but I'm only seeing about 25 to maybe 30% CPU utilization. In that case, I might break my rule that I was just talking about, keeping the number of executors no greater than the number of CPUs. I might bump that up from 4 to 6. and just watch and see how things work. All told, if you can keep the executor count the same or less than the number of vCPUs or CPUs on your agent, that's typically where you're going to stay. Again, you're going to have to measure and make adjustments as necessary. In the example today, I'm just going to stay on 1. For my remote root directory, I am going to put in home/vagrant. This is a Vagrant-based box. And I'm going to type agent. Now I could call this Jenkins agent because this Jenkins agent, whoops, forgot the slash. This Jenkins / agent doesn't exist. This folder would be created for me. Home Vagrant already exists, but the Jenkins agent doesn't exist. Also, what I typically like doing is when I'm going to be logging in as a user, I don't want to have all of the tooling end up in the root of that user directory. So I always push it down 1 level. So in this case, my user home directory is home vagrant, and I create an agent directory, or in the case that I'm showing here, Jenkins agent. I'm going to go ahead and change it back to agent. That way, everything that's associated with the agent from a software perspective is installed into the agent directory. Labels. So I know that this is a CentOS 7.9 box. There's a couple of other things that are on this box, so let's think about labels here. I know it's Linux, so I may give it just logically a Linux label. I also know that Docker is installed on this agent, so I put in a space and typed Docker. 2 more tools are actually installed on this. I actually have a Maven installation on this machine, and I also have a Gradle installation. So all of these labels can be added onto this agent. You can have many, fewer, maybe just 1. This is up to you. But make labels. Oh, one more thing that might be interesting. You might also want to make a label that is just the host name, because you might want to target, not all the time, but maybe, hey, I need to test this on this specific agent. I could target it by using agent 1. Whereas if I had multiple agents connected to this controller and I gave them each Linux, Docker, Maven, and Gradle, because they're all basically clones of my agent 1. Let's say I had an agent 1, agent 2, agent 3, and agent 4, but I'm wanting to test something specifically on agent 1, I could use agent 1. Now, jobs shouldn't use that as a normal ongoing way of doing jobs, but as maybe a release valve or an escape hatch, I could target just that single agent. Okay, let's get down to our usage. Now, with usage, that means I can use this node as much as possible, or only build jobs with label expressions matching this node. So when I create a pipeline job and I say agent, if I just said agent any, only build jobs with label expressions matching this node, that means this agent would never be picked up with agent any. So once we get to our example in a few moments, we're going to make this use this node as much as possible. Now let's look at our launch methods. There are 3 here by default. There's launch agent by connecting it to the controller. There's also launch agent via execution of command on the controller, and launch agents via SSH, which is what we're going to do today. The first option, though, is the ability, and you'll usually see this a lot when you're connecting Windows agents that don't have SSH available on them. This type of usage, launch agent by connecting it to the controller, is where the agent process starts and then connects back into the controller. So it's an agent to controller flow to make the initial connection. Whereas what we're going to be doing today, we're launching agents via SSH. This is where the controller initiates the connection to the agent. So in our case, the host is agent 1. Now the credentials. I'm going to create a new credential here. I don't have one set up yet. I'm going to use username with password. Typically with SSH, though, I would probably use SSH username with private key, just because. But today, just for our example, I'm going to use username with password. So I've got a username of Vagrant. I have a password. It's also Vagrant in this case. ID and description, all Vagrants. So now taking a look at credentials, I'll go ahead and select Vagrant. The host key verification strategy. We're going to come back and revisit this in a few moments, but to start with today, I'm going to have a non-verifying verification strategy. Again, we'll come back and look at that in a few minutes. Let's go and click on Advanced. We're not going to make any changes here, but let's say that your agent via SSH does not listen on standard port 22 for SSH. Maybe all of your standards within your organization, the SSH ports are 2222 or some other random number set that you use. This is where you would change that setting value to where, okay, I'm going to make the connection from my Jenkins controller into my agent. I'm doing it via SSH, so what is the port for SSH? Now, Java path, JVM options, all of these extra things we're not going to get into today. But if you needed these sections, this is where you would add them for the connection directly from your controller to the agent. That's the only thing that these settings affect. They do not affect directly how the controller is running. Now also, on my controller, I've installed the adopt OpenJDK 11.0.11. That's the JDK I have running the Jenkins process on the controller. I also have that same JDK, adopt OpenJDK 11.0.11 installed on my agent. So both of those versions are the exact same versions on both my controller and on my agent. I've also set up Java Home on both the controller and the agent, and set up the path to be Java Home/bin right at the front of the path. So having the Java Home set up, having the Java Home bin on the path, having the right versions together, that helps me make sure that if I have any issues when I'm making these connections, more than likely I know my issue isn't going to be the JDK because I have the exact same versions of the JDK running on both my controller and on my agent. It's a really important thing to do. If you can keep the version of Java on your controller the same as the version of Java on your agent, when that connection is made, if there are problems, more than likely it's not the JDK. It might be something else. All right, let's get back to setting up the rest of our agent here. For our availability, we're going to keep this agent online as much as possible. Since this agent is permanently connected to our controller, we just want it online all the time. But here's an option that you might want to consider. Bring this agent online according to a schedule. There may be times where you want to take this agent offline. Maybe on weekends there's backups or other things that happen, and you don't want any jobs to be potentially scheduled to run on this agent. You could set up a schedule that basically takes this out of service during that window and then puts it back in service when whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you're doing backups, maybe you're doing upgrades, whatever a maintenance window may be for you. And that way you know jobs aren't being scheduled to this agent at that time. But we're not going to do that today. We're just going to keep it online as much as possible. Now there are some other options down here under node properties. If you wanted to set up some separate environment variables that are created as this agent is connected to from the controller, you can do that. Let's go and click on save. Let's watch what happens here. You can see that it's launching down here. I'm going to go ahead and click on agent 1. And as you see right now, it appears to be connected. And it actually is. We can see here's our description. Here are our labels, Docker, Gradle, Linux, Maven. Let's take a look at the log. So we can see here, as it started up, we made the connection via SSH with a non-verifying strategy and made the connection to agent 1 on port 22. Notice this warning. SSH host keys are not being verified. Man-in-the-middle attacks may be possible against this connection. This is what we're going to revisit again in a few moments. But as we connect, you can see the authentication was successful. It renders out all of the environment variables. And in fact, you can see here that here's our Java home directory with bin. We can also see that Maven is on the path, and we can also see Gradle is on the path. Double checks what version of Java is running, and we get down to the bottom, and you can see that, hey, our agent is successfully connected and online. So now that we've got it connected online, let's go back and make a change to our configuration. And what we want to do is take care of this non-verifying. We want to get rid of this warning. So let's go back to configure. going to scroll down to the host key verification strategy, and I'm going to change this to known host file verification strategy. What does this mean? If we take a look at the help, this controls how Jenkins verifies the SSH key presented by the remote host while connecting. So non-verifying means no verifications at all. It just connects, ignores everything else. But now we want to do a known host. So I'm going to click on Save. I just clicked Save. We have not actually disconnected and reconnected yet to the agent to initiate that known host verification. So how do we do this? I'm going to click on Disconnect. I'm going to say yes. So now I've disconnected the agent 1 from my controller. Let's click on Launch Agent. Let's watch the log here for a moment. We can see here that it tried to verify varlib Jenkins, which on CentOS, that is the default Jenkins home directory. It's looking for a known hosts file. It wasn't able to find it. And then basically it's just trying to reconnect. And it's doing a countdown from 10 where we have 9 left. So how do we do this? How do we fix this to make sure that we're actually making this connection? Well, I have a shell open here to my controller. And let's see, who am I right now? I believe I am Vagrant. So I'm going to become root because in varlib Jenkins, my Vagrant user does not have access to that. If I cd over to varlib, whoops, and we take a look at that, we can see that Jenkins is owned by a user called Jenkins. So let's go into Jenkins here. And here's our Jenkins home directory. All the files within that directory are owned by Jenkins. So how do I want to do this? Well, let me grab some notes. I'm going to do a make dir for my Jenkins home.ssh because the .ssh directory does not exist here. Then I'm going to run the command. Copy it here. Here we go. I'm going to do an SSH key scan, giving it a -h of agent 1, so that's the host name, agent 1. I have my DNS set up to be able to resolve agent 1. And then I'm going to take the output of that and put it into the known hosts file in the Jenkins home.ssh directory. And there is the connections. So if I was to, let's see, where am I? If I was to cat.ssh/known hosts, then I can see the entry for known hosts. So that's cool. Almost. Let's check one more thing. If I do an ls here, you're going to see that SSH is owned by root. But since everything else here is owned by Jenkins, I want to change the ownership of my .ssh directory. So let me go and grab one more command, which I should have just typed. I'm changing the ownership to Jenkins of varlib jenkins.ssh, which will also change the .ssh ownership of that directory and that file. So now we have a known host file in the .ssh directory. Look what happened here. Let me scroll up just a little bit because we were working during this time. So we kept on failing. It was retrying every 15 seconds. We got down to 3. It got down to the next check, searching for agent 1 in known hosts. And then what we see here is that the SSH host key matches the key in known host file. Connection is allowed. So once we have that set up, we see what we saw before with the non-verifying strategy. We have our environment variables. It goes through, it copies over the latest remoting jar. And then finally, we're showing that the agent is connected and online. So let's go back over to our controller and we can see that agent is connected with one executor available. Now there's one more thing to see. This master block that's setting under build executor status. This means that we have the ability to actually execute builds directly on the controller. And in general, that's a really bad thing. And in fact, in this version of Jenkins LTS 2.289.1, there was a new administrative monitor that was created for that, saying building on the controller node can be a security issue. You should set the number of executors on the controller to 0. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and make that change. I'm going to click on Manage. I'm going to change the number of executors from 2 to 0. I'm going to set a label of ASDF, ASDF, ASDF. And I'm going to change this usage to only build jobs with the label expressions matching this node. So I'm sort of doing a couple of things here, almost security through obscurity. I'm setting a label that nobody should be able to guess. I'm setting it to only match. So if somebody was to add a label of ASDF, ASDF, ASDF to their job, it would still fail because my number of executors has been bumped down to 0 as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. Now we can see, if I go back to my dashboard, that section is now gone from the build executor status. Now, another way I could get to that is if I go to Manage Jenkins, I could also look at Configure System. And at the top of Configure System is a small section that has those same values for number of executors, labels, and usage. So I can get there in a couple of different ways. I can either come through Configure System, or I can come through this object right here to where I can then make the change through Configure. All of those map back to the same place. Okay, now that we have everything set up, let's go and create a job and make sure this agent is working. So I click on New Item. I'm going to call this Test Pipeline. There we go. And Pipeline, and click OK. And I already have a small job set up, which I'm going to paste in here. I'm saying Pipeline Agent Any. Remember, we set up our Agent 1 agent to always use as much as possible, not matching build nodes, so I can use Agent Any. And then I know that I've got Maven installed on that agent, so I'm going to run a Maven -- version, and let's see what happens. Let's click on Save, and click on Build Now. Job's running. Let's review the log here. We can see here as it starts up, running on Agent 1. So this reference to Agent 1 is the name of the agent itself. Not necessarily the host name, it happened to be in this case, but this is the name of the agent, not the host name of the agent, even though, like I said, it's the same in this case. And then when we run Maven version, we can see that it's a Maven 381, that's what we're expecting. And it's also using Java version 11.0.11, which is the only version of Java that I have installed on that agent. So at this point, we know that that agent is set up correctly, we're connected to it, and we're able to run a job against it to make sure that it works as expected. And that's it. That was a quick walkthrough of how to connect a Linux agent via SSH to a Jenkins controller. Now, if you have a Windows agent and you have OpenSSH or some other SSH available on that Windows machine, it may be possible to connect via SSH. However, most of the time I would recommend using the other method to where you have the agent connect directly back from Windows into the controller. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBeesDevs. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on the subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.